one of the foremost political predictors in this country. Let me just tell you about him very briefly. Jan van der Berg holds honours degrees in history, which he got cum laude, and journalism. He has covered Parliament since 2001 and has, at various times, been political editor of the Burger, the Beeld and Rapport, and parliamentary bureau chief of the Sunday Times. He's a well-known political analyst, appearing regularly on radio and television, and he's the author of the book Who Will Rule in 2019, which, if you're intrigued enough, is on sale at the bookshops. Please welcome Jan van der Berg.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. I hope that you have all your questions ready, because I would like us to have a conversation if we can. If you need to leave at any point, do so, but do so quietly, and please do come back. Also, when you have a question, just put your hand up. There will be time for questions afterwards, but it's perhaps best if these questions are raised as we go along. So what I'm going to be talking about, and what I dealt with in my most recent book, which the lady did not mention, which is called Will South Africa Be OK?, is the aftermath of the 2019 elections and what happened. So let's just first take a look at what those results were. When we take a look, we will see that the ANC ended up losing 19 seats, and therefore ended up on 230 seats out of 400 in the National Assembly. This, by international standards, still gave them quite a good majority, excellent majority, 57.5% of the vote they got. And at the same time, it continues the downward spiral of the ANC, which we will see is continuing in by-elections. So one does not know when they will lose that overall majority. They did win 8 provinces, the single exception being the Western Cape, where they are the official opposition. The Democratic Alliance only lost 5 seats to end up on 84. But they have struggled very much to deal with that loss, and we shall look at the reasons why and the synopsis or the ideas for going forward as far as the DA are concerned. The EFF were the big winners in this election. You will see that their gain is exactly the same as the ANC loss. Of course, it's never quite as exact as that, but I think one can say that they gained most of their votes from the ANC, and the ANC lost most of their votes to the EFF, where the DA is now the opposition in 4 provinces, which is the Free State, the Eastern Cape, the Northern Cape, and Gauteng. The EFF has moved up to being the official opposition in 3 provinces, which is up in the north, the Northwest Province, Limpopo, and Mpumalanga. The Inkatha Freedom Party sort of found itself resurrected from the political grave, showing growth for the first time since 1994. They went up by 3 seats to 13, and they overtook the DA as official opposition in KwaZulu-Natal. Freedom Front Plus is a right-wing grouping of which we do not know much in this province, but they're strong in the north. They went up by 6 seats to a total of 10, and then there are 8 smaller parties in Parliament, each of which has less than 4 seats. So that was the result of that election, which you probably know by now. The provinces, in the Western Cape, the DA did better than they expected, but worse than they did before. They are the government here. They took 55% of the vote, which is down about 4% on their previous score, but still is quite a comfortable majority here, and it was better than they expected. They expected to get 51 at best. I think there was a bit of voter panic right towards the end when the Cape Times did them that massive favour of actually saying that they might go below 50. Gauteng province, very close result. The ANC won Gauteng, but they only won it by 50.19%. That is close. if less than 15,000 people in Gauteng had voted differently, we would have had an opposition coalition in Gauteng, and I can tell you now that the opposition would have coalesced to vote against the ANC. As we stand now, 37 seats in that legislature of 73 belong to the ANC and 36 to the combined opposition, which means the ANC actually has to pitch for the sittings, otherwise they are beaten. In KwaZulu-Natal, the resurrection of the IFP. For how long, we do not know, but they're back from the political death, and they have found themselves back in the opposition benches, having unseated the Democratic Alliance, which held it since 2014. Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and Northwest, the Reds are on the march. This time not the red under every bed, but the Reds of Mr. Malema. And they are the official opposition in all three of those provinces, having gained the official opposition spot in Mpumalanga from the DA. They have been the official opposition in Limpopo and Northwest before. Small change in some of those small provinces and in the Eastern Cape, where we did not see much change happening. ANC rules, DA in second place, and the EFF third in all those provinces, but there's no clear indication that anything is changing. Now, if we look at political trends, first we can look at the polling percentage. The polling percentage in South Africa keeps coming down and down. This time it reached about 65%, whereas, for instance, in 1994 it was 88%. So we can see that fewer and fewer people are registering to vote and fewer people are voting. That, of course, is the most dangerous trend. Many people think that the EFF might be the most dangerous trend, or the Freedom Front maybe, but the most dangerous trend is when people do not want to vote at all. And I told the story last year, but it remains such an important story to tell. In 2011, when I covered the municipal elections in the Mangaung Metro in Bloemfontein, I happened upon a small little protest which was happening on the road between Bloemfontein and De Wetsdorp, which is not one of the great metropolises of South Africa, and therefore often goes unnoticed by the mainstream media. And I was interested in this phenomenon of probably ANC supporting young people, because this was before the days of the EFF, opposing an ANC government and basically causing some form of unrest in the process, clearly not being served well by the intra-party disciplinary measures. And I asked the people, how can you protest against a government you vote for? And who are you going to vote for in the 2011 municipal elections? And the answer has haunted me since. They said to me, "Sir, we do not vote. Democracy does not work for us." That's the most dangerous thing. So we are seeing polling percentage come down, but it remains high. To put it in context, it's almost the same as in the United Kingdom, 65%, and it is about 12% above the average in the USA, where about 53% of people usually go to vote in presidential elections. So, Moira and company, where are you? I don't see you. There you are. We are struggling, but we're not at your level yet, as far as participation goes. Now, registration numbers also, we didn't see the increase that we should see, and I'm going to take those 2 points together. It's the youth vote and the registration numbers, because what we saw is that the youth vote, despite the population pyramid of our country, which has a lot of young people, we know that the majority of our people should be voting when they are below 30. But the number of people registering to vote who are 18 and 19 years old actually went down significantly between 2014 and 2019, as did the numbers of those who registered to vote who are below 30 years of age. What that means is that your registration levels are very, very low with younger voters, and that, of course, is not a good trend. There's a party which is impacted by that, and that is the EFF, who mostly get their votes from the young. Dr. Mboyeseni Ndlozi of the EFF told me before the election that they expect to lose about 5 percentage points because of the low youth registration. I think he might well have been correct. So those of you who are EFF supporting, and I'm sure you're filling up this venue, that's a real worry for you. Those of you who are not, a real relief. Now, we've had a lot of by-elections since then, and basically the trend which I will return to is that, that the sort of divisive parties keep growing, by which I mean the parties that grew most in the election were the parties furthest to the left and furthest to the right in our parliament, and you see that trend continuing. We had the by-election in Schweizer-Reinecke in the northwest this week, where the council was disbanded because of poor service delivery. Can you imagine how bad a council must be for it to be disbanded? Well, it's happened twice in Schweizer-Reinecke. It's the Mamusa municipality, and if we were with an Afrikaans audience, I would say it's a Mamusa gesukkel also. But anyway, be that as it may, it's the only municipality in our country which has been disbanded twice. So I think one can argue that is perhaps the worst municipality in the country. But we had those by-elections, and what happened was that the ANC remained in power and didn't lose any seats, but the local Civic Party lost all their seats. The EFF gained 3 seats to go up from 2 to 5. And the Freedom Front and the DA both got 1 seat, but the Freedom Front overtook the DA massively in the white Afrikaans vote. We will look at that trend when we get to the DA and the Freedom Front points, but basically the trend is that the parties on the extreme are doing better and better in our country. The big question is whether we had a free and fair election. I would say no. We succeeded in holding an election and having results accepted, not thanks to the IEC, but despite the IEC this year. Why do I say that? Because for the first time since 1994, evidence was unearthed and evidence came to bear that people did not have much trouble voting twice. Why did that happen? Or many more times, who would know? Firstly, was your ink as tough to get off as previous years? It wasn't, was it? Something went wrong with the ink. Now that was important because basically you have a few reasons why we can say we have free and fair elections. Firstly, there's the voters' roll. That's very important in a municipal election where you can only vote wherever you are registered. But as you will know, in a general election, as our rules stand, you can vote wherever you want to. You must just fill out an extra form. Well, that of course makes it very difficult to monitor. The second sort of safety net is the zip machines, those little ones that go when you go in and you vote. Unfortunately, this year they were not linked nationally, so they served actually no purpose whatsoever. Third, it is a matter of the ink, which of course we saw didn't work so well this year. Fourth, in the past you had your ID book stamped, but now things are changing. I don't know if you've got them, but these days you get one of these. Now to stamp that would be ridiculous. So they stopped stamping the ID books. And so it was down to the ink. And the ink wasn't perfect. Dedray Carter, the former Cope MP, managed to get to the front of the line and get a ballot paper no less than 7 times. She claims she didn't vote 7 times. I hope she tells the truth. Point is, she could have. Now, the DA and the EFF, especially in Gauteng, on polling day told us that this kind of problem was rife. So I became very worried because it became clear that the Gauteng result was going to be close, as it was. On the evening of voting, this was on Wednesday night, the four largest parties all knew that there had something had gone wrong with this double voting. And that is when, at the Electoral Centre, there was a meeting by leadership of EFF, DA, IFP and ANC, and where it was decided to not upset the apple cart but to change the electoral law. Statistics South Africa afterwards did research and found that in 3.63% of cases countrywide there was double voting. Now, given that the majority of the ANC in Gauteng province is only 0.19%, that falls easily within that margin of error. But I can tell you now that the most exciting moment for me of the whole election was when those leadership of especially the opposition parties who had much to gain decided not to upset the apple cart. Why did they not do so? They did not want to wreck the economy, and they did not want to cause a different election and for us to be the next basket case. That was really exciting to see everybody put the country first, despite the fact that they had a really, really good case. That to me was exciting, but what you will see is that the Electoral Act will change now. In the next election, we will only be able to cast your vote where you are registered. This is because the IEC knows that this year's election actually was not above board. You will see that change in the Electoral Act coming along. But the most exciting thing was when even the EFF said, no, in the national interest, we are not going to oppose. Now, the ANC had an interesting election, to say the least, and since the election, it has been a rough for the ANC. If you think the DA is not doing well, ANC is struggling. So what saw them through, especially in Gauteng, was the Ramaphosa factor. I'm sure all of you have friends who actually do not necessarily support the ANC, who supported Mr. Ramaphosa. It was a line pushed very strongly in the Sunday Times by Peter Bruce, for instance, that you can vote Ramaphosa and you sort of almost can feel you didn't vote for the ANC. Some people bought that argument and did so. So the Ramaphosa factor certainly, I think, got the ANC across the line. I think that's also the opinion within the ANC. Secondly, however, that election has now come and gone. And the next point that we need to look out for after this election is the National General Council of the ANC, which takes place in June, July. The exact date and venue have not been decided yet, but the National General Council will take place. And what that is a meeting of branch members of the ANC, hundreds of them, who have to take a look at how the ANC has progressed since its last national conference, which was the one in Nasrec where Mr. Ramaphosa was elected, and to have a look at how they are doing at implementing the decisions they took there. The problem there is that many of the decisions that were taken there are not being implemented, to be fair. For instance, it was decided that the Reserve Bank had to be nationalized. Has the Reserve Bank been nationalized? No. And not yet is a strange answer. That will be what Mr. Ramaphosa would try to be saying, but nice answer, not yet. No, it hasn't been. And quite frankly, it's not going to be easy to do so. Secondly, the changing of the constitution to ensure that expropriation without compensation happens easier. Has it been done? No, not yet. No, it has not been done. Then on the decision to not privatize any of the state assets, have we had much progress there? No. So Mr. Ramaphosa is in trouble on that score. Just sort of objectively, his opponents would be able to claim that on many of the decisions by the ANC conference, which is supposed to bind him as a member of the ANC, it has not happened. So Mr. Ramaphosa has some problems. And then, of course, there's Eskom. Yes, most popular organisation in South Africa today. Now, Eskom is a stick that Mr. Ramaphosa and his friend Mr. Pravin Gordhan, the Minister of Public Enterprises, will be beaten with. I think it is fair to say it's not so much of their doing. Mr. Ramaphosa did sit there for 5 years, or almost 5 years, next to Mr. Zuma, and he was in charge, was Mr. Ramaphosa, of Eskom, specifically the so-called war room. Not what happened, but at the same time, the question is whether the opponents of Mr. Ramaphosa, which are Mr. Ace Magashule and the former president, Mr. Zuma, and the likes, Batabile Dlamini and Nomvula Mokonyane and such bright stars of our political firmament, whether they would do any better and whether to some extent they are more to blame. Mr. Malusi Gigaba for one. So the point is, however, that with Eskom, that gives the opponents of Mr. Ramaphosa a stick to beat him with, and boy are they beating him. That is why you will see that at the moment there is an effort to unseat Mr. Pravin Gordhan by the EFF, by COSATU, and by some in the ANC who say that Mr. Gordhan must go because he's not managing the state-owned enterprise as well. Question is, would they do it better? We'll see, because they're going to try. SAA is a case in point. What happened with SAA these days? I mean, the last time the unions went on strike to get more money from the bankrupt SAA, they were placed under business rescue after another trade union, Solidarity, brought a case which has since been accepted by all unions and the government to place SAA under business rescue. The point there is that with Eskom and SAA, people will have to be fired. Jobs are going to be lost. At this stage, Eskom has 45,000 employees. Can you believe it? Eskom itself says it needs 34,000. The World Bank says it needs about 14,000. The positions that will be lost will not be positions that are well-qualified people. It will not be the schooled positions. It's the unschooled positions. It's the lower positions, and those people are the very people whom the ANC depend on to vote for it. So some tough decisions must be taken at Eskom. The NEC, that's the National Executive Committee of the ANC, is meeting as we speak, and we are told that is on the agenda. So maybe we'll see a decision, but I wouldn't hold my breath. It's a decision the ANC has been ducking for the last few years. But basically a decision on all the state-owned entities have to be taken, and that decision will include that people need to lose their jobs, and that's going to make the ANC deeply unpopular. That is also the truth at SAA. The other thing, of course, is that they need to be, to some extent, privatized, which is a swear word in the ANC. So they talk about public-private partnerships, where the state keeps the majority stake in the organization, but where the public also gets to have, the public companies also get to play a part, private companies. So it's private-public partnership. Tito Mboweni and the budget coming up at the end of February. That might turn out to be a bit of a horror show. Professor Jannie Rousseau, the Dean of Economics at Wits University, has done research to say that if you up the tax brackets, if people pay more tax in this country at the moment, you're not necessarily going to get more income. We've reached that point. So basically what the government has to do, and what Mr. Mboweni, the Minister of Finance, realizes, is that they have to make do with what they have. They can't really increase taxes all that much without basically killing off investment in the economy. So that's going to be a really tough budget. Don't quite know how they're going to pull it off. I'm sure that's what the NEC is being told at the moment, and the populists within the ANC will not like it. Then there's the land issue. Important issue because it's not only on land, it's on property. And what it is Section 25 of the Constitution, which Parliament and the ANC previously voted to change. Where we are at the moment is that the ad hoc committee which deals with it has published a bit of a dog's breakfast, to be frank with you, for comment. I was in the meeting where that thing was formulated, and the problem was that the ANC in the committee was fighting with themselves so much that in the end the legal representatives of Parliament, the actual officials, wrote the basis for the legislation, which has now come before the public, and you can access it on the parliamentary website or in any number of places, and you can comment on it until the 31st of January this year. So what we see in Parliament is that the capitalist opposition, which is the DA, the IFP, the Freedom Front and the ACDP, they are dead opposed to any change of the Constitution. The EFF wants to change the Constitution to get to a position where the state has custodianship of all land, and you basically rent it from the state for 25 years, and you can farm what the state tells you to farm. You can ask the state what you want to farm, but it's their decision. The ANC, we don't know what they want. Honestly, ANC has not come up with any proposal yet. And the president, when he spoke in Kimberley last week, said that ANC structures had to take part in the parliamentary process. That can only mean that the ANC doesn't have a view. That is highly problematic. If the ANC were to formulate a view which is close to the EFF view, then the EFF and the ANC has enough votes to pass it in Parliament. They need 2/3. They have about 68% between them, so they have enough. There seems to be very little appetite in the ANC to go the EFF way. That means the ANC is stuck as long as the capitalist opposition doesn't vote with it, so we might not have a change in the Constitution. I think that at this moment in time is the most likely result. But before you get too happy about that, I don't think that's a good result at all. Because that means the situation stays alive and it becomes a rallying point for the populists in the ANC. I'm not going to call them left because they're not. The populists in the ANC and the EFF. They will have a rallying call to say the Constitution was not changed. So to my mind, if I were the capitalist opposition and I see this difference of opinion between the ANC and the EFF, I would, if I were the DA, Freedom Front, IFP, ACDP, look very carefully at the actual wording that comes from the ANC. If the Ramaphosa grouping in the ANC has enough of a majority and enough power to put forward a change to the Constitution which actually does what they say it will do, which is to make explicit what is implicit in Section 25, which would be to say you keep the court as an arbiter, you keep free and fair compensation, and all you add is that free and fair compensation can be naught. Not will be, can be naught, which I think might be the proposal. And I think the capitalist opposition should think whether they should not support it and give a 2/3 majority to such a mild proposal. Because what would happen is that would basically, in practice, take out the process for the next 15 years. You will not be able to change the Constitution willy-nilly. If the Constitution has been changed, I think the court would be very slow to rectify another change within 15 years on the same topic. So I'm thinking that people should not be too sold on this matter of not changing the Constitution at all. It would also, from the capitalist opposition side on a strategic level, drive a wedge between the EFF and the ANC if that were to happen, which is in the interest of the voters of the capitalist opposition. So I think that there needs to be a rethink on the side of the opposition on where they stand. and they must look at the content of the proposal and not only the form. That's just an opinion, which I hope we can discuss somewhat. But yes, that's how I see it playing out. Hopefully I'm right. The future of the Reserve Bank, there's a decision by the ANC that it must be nationalized. Nobody in the top leadership of the ANC thinks it's viable. If it's not done, it's a stick to hit Mr. Ramaphosa with. If Mr. Ramaphosa can get 2/3 for his land proposal, this stick might go away. Another reason for the opposition to perhaps think about supporting a moderate change to the Constitution. And then we get to national health insurance. That's actually more dangerous than the land issue. There's absolutely zero indication that national health insurance, which is a decision taken by the ANC and therefore should be implemented, that it can work. The trial runs were a complete disaster. It is a life-threatening decision as it stands, and it will also lead to an outflow of doctors and nurses from our country. So the capitalist opposition once again is united on opposing the NHI, this being then the DA, IFP, Freedom Front, ACDP, COPE for what it's worth. And on this issue, interestingly, the EFF is also opposed. The EFF is opposed to the ANC's proposal, not on the grounds of ideology, but on the grounds of practice. The EFF says that the ANC government has neither the funding nor the expertise to implement the NHI. Who agrees with the EFF? Good, won't see that often. The rest of you disagree with the EFF, you want the NHI. Now, this is the kind of open-mindedness which the DA and its allies in the capitalist opposition will need to learn. You must watch the EFF. This was the basis of, to my mind, the 1994 compromise, and was Oliver Tambo, the unsung hero of that decision, who actually always said you must watch your opponent to see when they change, and then you must be susceptible to it. So don't just see red. Look at the content of the red and see whether there are elements where you agree. And sometimes they might surprise you. So in the case of the EFF, which we'll get to, their decision is to oppose the NHI as it stands. And that is an important pincer movement on a practical level, because what it does is it allows the opposition to build a rationality argument. Now, we have seen in court that where a decision is argued by the government is argued to be irrational, the court has not been loath to rule against it. Now, if you have a pincer movement where you have the EFF on the one side and the capitalist opposition on the other, pinching the ANC, if the EFF is on board, and if the DA perhaps for 1 second can stop attacking the EFF as fascist and think strategically, then you can have a pincer movement where the ANC, where the ideological sort of warren of the ANC to which they might retreat is taken away because the EFF will argue the opposite. In that case, you can make a case for the fact that the NHI is an irrational plan. If I were the opposition, which I am not, that is what I would do. So I think the NHI can be stopped in its tracks, and should be, because it can't work.
Sorry?
Yes?
But why does Discovery Health and Metropolitan Health support the NHI?
Come again?
Why do the big medical aid companies in South Africa actually support the NHI?
Why do many companies? Medical aid groupings. I don't think they do. I think they are waiting for it to be formulated. I am not aware of the fact that they will support the idea but not the practice. You see, everybody says we're in favor of universal health care, but nobody wants to pay for it. So, those companies that say that they support it, they just support it in principle. I'm not aware of any who support the current model, which is where the tire hits the tar. Is how will it be implemented? And it's the same situation as with the health practitioners, which you will also tell me that the Organization of Health Practitioners is in favor of NHI, so they say. But unfortunately, all polls show that more than 30% of doctors want to leave the country immediately should NHI be implemented. So it may be so that at this stage there's a sort of, how can I put it, a formal support of the idea, but not of the practice. So I don't think you will see the medical aids coming out in favor of it in the end, because it will mean, to a large degree, their destruction. I know what they're saying now, some of them, but I don't think they're being quite honest. Democratic Alliance, yes, the Democratic Alliance now is in a difficult situation ever since the election, in that it has a leader. Who is the leader? Steenhuisen, and it has a ruler. So we'll have to see how they handle that. It's going to be tough, and it has been tough. 2 centers of power, always difficult. Of course, it depends on how they, in the end, deal with it. Will Steenhuisen and Zille find a way to work together? We'll see. The leadership election is in May. I would not count any candidacy out as it stands, no matter what anyone says. I think everything is possible. And should the former Premier of the Western Cape choose to oppose the leader of the DA, who do you think will win? She'll win. So, she has the power. That's important to remember. And it's a tough situation for Mr. Steenhuisen to deal with. And it's an interesting situation for people who vote for the party to deal with. Many people won't mind, but some will. And it has already led to some problems and differences between the two, and it will always be such. So how they handle it will depend on how they get out of it. But currently, the synopsis is not very good. If we look at by-elections, I'm going to look at a few because they're interesting, and I actually left one out there, which I'll get to. The first by-election that I want to look at took place in Reenendal between George and Knysna. It was a DA ward which was held by a woman with a colourful name of Mrs. Mercia Dragoner, which she chooses to pronounce Dragoner, but it isn't, it's Dragoner. So Mrs. Dragoner was the DA member there, the councillor, but she's an old friend of Patricia de Lille's. And we know that the DA and Mrs. de Lille had a bit of a fallout. So she was she then resigned from the DA, and a by-election was called, in which she came up against a DA candidate called Mrs. Mookie Windwaai. It's colourful down there in the Southern Cape. And the DA held the ward, but only by 8 votes. I almost lost to the ID in that rural vote in the Southern Cape. The next week there was Barrydale. Now Barrydale is a nice little town on the way to Oudtshoorn, and it was one of the strongest ANC strongholds in the rural Western Cape. And the DA took it from the ANC very, very easily. But there was no what's the party called? Good. No Good candidate and no Freedom Front candidate. So the DA could unite the opposition vote. They took that Barrydale seat off the ANC. Then up the West Coast in Langebaan. That, of course, is DA country through and through, except at this time they didn't do so well because a lot of their votes stayed away. And the interesting thing was, if you went there, which I did, was that the people who stayed away were people who moved in from Gauteng. There's this whole new gated community there in Langebaan, and there's lots of Gautengers living there. They've moved down. They didn't vote for the DA. They didn't have the option to vote for who they wanted to vote for, but who do you think they wanted to vote for? The Freedom Front. So the Freedom Front, with this migration of white people from the north, is going to become more and more of a factor in the Western Cape, I think. one almost does not hope so, because it adds another difficult aspect to our politics down here, and it will certainly bedevil reconciliation. But it seems as though, look, they won a seat in the legislature for the first time since 1999. The great Mr. Peter Maree, who is back, this time with the real far right. If you look at where they got their votes from, that's pretty interesting. I know we're at the DA now, but the Freedom Front in the Western Cape, I call their vote 3 lines and a dot, okay? Basically, you can see where they got their votes from, and it's not from the northern suburbs of Cape Town. It's not Bellville, it's not the Boereworskurten. No, you're wrong. The big vote for the Freedom Front in the Western Cape lies between Mossel Bay and Knysna. And if you know that area, that is retired Pretoria. It's Hartenbos, it's George, it's Glentana. Those are the Freedom Front areas. That's the line. And the dots are the Suiderparel, which is the southern part of Paarl. It's a little bit in Worcester. And then there's a little dot in Brackenfell. For the rest, they didn't get votes. They didn't get votes in the rural areas. In the Boland, they made no showing, and they didn't do well in Bellville, Durbanville, Kuils River area at all. That area remains staunchly DA, but I think that there is a movement down from the northern interior, which is helping the Freedom Front in the Western Cape. What we can see, therefore, in the Western Cape is that both the ANC and the DA are going backward, the ANC more so than the DA. So that means that the DA majority in the Western Cape for the time being should be safe. Bethel is a horrible little town on the coal fields of Mpumalanga. And its ward had been a DA ward, but yes, you like Bethel. In Langebaan. Yeah. Look, the result was that the DA kept its majority, but that the poll went down, which means that a lot of people that one would have expected to vote DA stayed at home. And my understanding from speaking to those people, clearly I can't prove it scientifically, was that they would have preferred to vote for the Freedom Front. So, yeah. Right, then Bethel. Now, Bethel, anyone opposed to my saying it's a horrible little town? Okay, if we have agreement on that, what happened there was it was a DA ward, but it's what's called a 3-way marginal between the DA, Freedom Front, and the ANC. Anyone there can win it. In the end, the ANC won it, and if you think 8 votes is close, the ANC won it by 6 votes. But who was second? The Freedom Front. So the ANC and the Freedom Front both got about 650 votes, and the DA came in third in a ward that it had won on about 400 votes. So you could see the movement away from the DA, and basically that would be white working class voters in the north of the country, and the DA did not make up that difference from black voters who stuck with the ANC, and the EFF had a good growth in that area. Then we went to Stilfontein. Stilfontein is another harsh little town between Klerksdorp and Potchefstroom. It is also the hometown of the leader of the Freedom Front, Dr. Pieter Groenewald, who was the mayor there back in the 80s and was also elected on the Conservative Party ticket, which was the far right wing, in 1989. He knows that area well. They took it from the DA at a trot. Easily won by about 200 votes, which is big for that kind of ward. Those rural wards have about 3,000 votes each, so 200 is a good majority. Then we moved to Potchefstroom, to the Middelpark area in Potchefstroom. Again, the DA lost the ward to the Freedom Front, and this week in Schweizer-Reineke, very interesting result. I've spoken of it before. EFF more than doubling, almost tripling its vote in Schweizer-Reineke, which admittedly is a very small municipality. And the predominantly white ward, which is Ward 9, which is Schweizer-Reineke Town, which used to be a DI ward, went to the Freedom Front. Freedom Front took 672 votes, The ANC came in second at about 400. The DA got 220 votes. Big swing. What it means is that, and this is becoming a trend in the Northwest Province, that the DA has lost about 2/3 of its white vote to the Freedom Front in the Northwest Province. We'll have to see in the bigger towns, Klerksdorp, Rustenburg, whether that's true, but in the Platteland that's the case. And
do only white people vote for the Freedom Front?
come again?
Do only white people vote for the Freedom Front?
Well, it's impossible to say because your vote is your secret. But I think the number of black people voting for the Freedom Front would roughly equal the number of white people voting for the EFF. It would be unusual. Good question. You almost had me there. I can't make a claim because it's a secret vote. But if you look at where the Freedom Front got its votes, it certainly didn't get it in the Western Cape and the coloured areas. I can tell you that, and not in the black areas either. So what we are seeing is that the DA has a massive problem. It's shedding support hand over fist in certain areas. It might well be that there's a by-election where I live in Sea Point, and that would not make any difference. I mean, the DA would win Sea Point by 98% if you put up a donkey carcass. So this is not universally true, but where I think the DA can count its lucky stars is that it has not had a by-election in Pretoria. I think the trend there, especially in the north and the west of Pretoria, is very strongly against them. So that brings us to, what does the DA do? And at this stage, its answer is to seek cooperation with other opposition parties as long as it is not the EFF. That is the change that Helen Zille brought, is that she brought more focus on opposition cooperation, but with the smaller opposition parties like the UDM, the COPE and the ACDP. To my mind, that is limited growth, if any. But that is what they are focused on. They do not, she certainly does not want to work with the EFF. To my mind, that's going to make it terribly difficult to unseat the ANC anyway. But what she has brought is way more policy certainty, I think, which the DA didn't have. So what's to be done? The votes that the DA are shedding are Afrikaans votes. Their black vote remains basically the same at a low level, and their white English vote is locked up. It's pretty much universal, if not Mr. Gottschalk, but most white English-speaking people vote for the DA. Their problem lies with their white Afrikaans and their coloured Afrikaans vote, which is slipping away. And to my mind, if you know the Afrikaans community well, as I hope I do, Afrikaans people want their political leaders to be people you want to be like. They want them to be likable, decent, or at least to put up a show as being likable and decent. And that means that the DA must stop fighting, firstly with itself, and secondly with everybody else. The current tone within the DA, Afrikaans people find off-putting. And you saw that in the by-election that I forgot to put there, which was in Germiston, which was an election which was very interesting. It's a majority white ward, of which three of the 5 voting districts are predominantly white English, and 2 of the 5 voting districts are predominantly Afrikaans. Mostly former railway workers and then people with businesses in Germiston. And in the 3 predominantly English areas, the DA did extremely well. And in the 2 predominantly Afrikaans areas, people just didn't come to vote at all. There wasn't a Freedom Front candidate. I think that the DA has a massive problem amongst Afrikaans voters, both coloured and white, and I think it doesn't know how to handle it. And one of the reasons, this is a point I made last year when I predicted that they would struggle, is that who was their most prominent Afrikaans-speaking leader until 18 months ago? Here in Cape Town, Patricia de Lille. If you asked Afrikaans people who was the strongest Afrikaans voice in the DA, everybody knew it was Mrs. de Lille, or Auntie Pat as she's known, much loved in the Afrikaans community. Away she went. Who came in her place? We don't really have anyone in our place at the moment, do we? There's no strong Afrikaans leader in the Democratic Alliance at the moment, unless you can name one. Steenhuisen is not Afrikaans. Have you heard him speak Afrikaans? It's good that he tries, but he's pretty much on the Tony Leon level of speaking Afrikaans, which was always appreciated but never quite understood by Afrikaans people. Anyway, so they have a problem there. But I mean, yes, ma'am.
Separate point. It was just, what about the Mamani factor? How did that impact? I mean, does that cut the growth of that?
Interesting question, the Maimane factor. When Mr. Maimane became the leader of the DA, many people had a lot of doubt about whether he really stood for much. And then he proved everybody wrong. Every leader is as good as their result in the 2016 election, when the DA did the best it might ever do. Well, certainly the best it's ever done. And Mr. Maimane had to be measured by that measure, and by that measure he was very successful. But then there was a breakup of sorts between the DA and the rest of the opposition, and Mr. Maimane led, to my mind, a rather low-octane charge in 2019, where one became sort of unsure what the DA stood for and what it stood against, perhaps more to the point. And what we saw has been that the DA has had 3 heads of policy in the last 4 years, none of whom have been in a position to formulate a policy. Now one is back, that's Gwen Gwenya, and she is a personal friend, so I'm not unbiased, but I think she's one of the most brilliant people in our country. She will be found by many in the DA to be somewhat to their right, certainly to the right of me, but she's to the right of many people in the DA. She's a bit conservative on some issues. For instance, she's not progressive on for instance, affirmative action issues. She's quite opposed to that. She's opposed to any reference to race in our politics, which will play well with many in the DA and play poorly with others. It's going to be interesting how that plays out. She's now the head of policy for the DA. She used to be with the IRR, the Institute of Race Relations. She's going to have an important job to craft policy for the DA, because mostly DA policies date back to 2013. There hasn't been much new policy, and of course a lot of things have changed. So what she does is going to be very important. And to come back to the Maimane factor, he was blamed by many people for not allowing policy to be formulated, because he was in favor of many things, but he didn't choose against other things. People would refer to him as the pillow. The last person who made contact left the impression, you know. So that was a bit of a problem for the DA and for Mr. Maimane. He has now teamed up with Herman Mashaba, the former mayor of Johannesburg, and they are starting something which at this stage is called The Conversation, and which should morph into a political party come March. Where they'll get their support, I don't know. I don't think there's much oxygen where they are, but we'll see what they do. We actually don't know yet. It still has to happen. I don't know what Mr. Maimane's removal from the DA leadership is going to do to the DA. To my mind, the DA is working so hard to get back the conservative vote that it's lost, that it might lose the woke vote that it had, which is the young people. You know what woke means, no? Woke is, okay. No, it's a newish term, which is people who do not want to offend others, and who try to do the right thing, but who seem to irritate some other people who think that they are just being politically correct. That didn't work. Can I try to re-explain? It's a bit difficult. It's people who, for instance, are very sensitive on gender matters. and try to not offend other people in the language that they use and that sort of thing. Yeah. So they're seen as a little limp-wristed by their opponents and as very decent people by their supporters. Right, so I think that woke vote, it's just my effort to try and define the indefinable. Okay, so the woke vote, which is the sort of young progressive vote, might be lost if the DA goes too far in this whole thing of trying to win back the votes it's lost. Economic freedom fighters. Nice red outfit. Does it show allegiance? Just kidding. The economic freedom fighters have had strong growth, as we saw in the election. The question is, do they have a ceiling? They grew more in the areas where they had done very poorly before than in the areas where they were strong. Their support in Northwest and Limpopo, which were their strongest areas, and Gauteng, didn't grow much. Their support in Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal grew spectacularly. They made some sort of breakthrough to the Zulu-speaking electorate, which is always somewhat separate, and they grew well there. Didn't do too well in any of the coastal provinces. They did very poorly here. They went up from 1 member of the legislature to 2, but might as well have remained 1. They only just got the second. So their strength lies in the industrialized part of the interior. The Northern Free State, the south of Northwest Province, where the gold mines and the platinum mines are, Gauteng, and the Highveld of Mpumalanga, which is the coal areas. So if you want to look at where the EFF grows, those are the areas in which it grows. Even in KZN, it does much, much better in the urban industrialized areas, which would include like Newcastle, Richards Bay, Durban, Pietermaritzburg, and Port Shepstone, as in the rest of the province where they do not do well at all. They are a party for the lumpen proletariat, as the communists would say, in the urban areas, the very poor in the urban areas. Now, I attended the EFF People's Assembly. I covered it, which took place in December. It's basically each party in this country has a different name for what is essentially its National Congress. In this case, there were about 5,000 people, of which exactly 4 were white, including me. It was a fascinating experience. As with the previous EFF People's Assembly, which means National Congress, it was simply the best organized political event on the South African calendar. It's a very disciplined grouping. There is no breaking away from sessions to stand and gossip in the corridors. There's no littering taking place. It was as clean as Switzerland, with 5,000 people there. At the same time, well, and then of course they actually have policy, which some other opposition parties simply don't have. 250 pages of it if you want to go and read it. It's fascinating stuff. And it's very difficult to, it's not that it's not coherent, it is very coherent, but you cannot say the EFF is against this or for that before you have read the actual policies. And what I have found is that they love policy discussion. So they're actually not as set in their ways as many of the others, perhaps because it's a bit of a greenfields organization. But what we do not have in the EFF is any form of democracy. It was, to me, actually offensive to attend the voting sessions. They have the following weird system in place. For you to be nominated into a leadership position, you cannot be nominated before that National Assembly, which of course means that it's actually you can be sanctioned if you campaign before the National Assembly. So this National Assembly sits there. It was something like 3,200 delegates, and then lots of hangers on, but 3,200 voting delegates. And for every nomination to come through, it had to be verified by 1/3 of those present, which in this case came to 954, and by show of hands. Now that is not right, because that means not a single position was contested. The first person who got nominated always got more than 954, and everyone else got less, because everybody was too scared to put their hand up against the majority. Now, I am taking issue with that, and I took it up with the EFF leadership, and they said there are different kinds of democracy, they tell me. I found it very ominous. But it is very important to have a look at what their positions are, for instance on the NHI, which is not the only one where we see important policy shifts from the EFF. Another issue where we saw important policy shifts was on nationalisation of land. They have shifted to only be in favour of the nationalisation of what they call productive land. That means land on which there are farms or factories. They no longer will take your house. Now, why is that? I took part in a radio discussion with Eusebius McKaiser the other day, and who is a close friend, and we had a guy call in from Alexandra Township, and obviously I would quote him because he agrees with my view completely, which was the following. The guy said, I used to be an EFF supporter, and then here in Alex they showed us where we could put our houses, and they showed us a parcel of land, and we invaded it and we put up our house. But I am no longer an EFF supporter because I don't want them to take my house. I'm not kidding. That was what the guy said. His name was Gift, and he called from Alexandra. You can go and listen to the podcast. The discussion took place just before the EFF Congress. Anyway, so the reason why is that with the EFF's black middle class crowd in Gauteng, this whole thing of expropriation without compensation didn't play so well. So it wasn't the vote getter they thought it would be, and it cost them a lot of donations, because the middle class wouldn't donate no matter what their race was. So, that is important to watch. Where does the EFF change? And that brings us back to the Oliver Tambo quote, always look at your opponent and see whether they change or not. Incidentally, had the Johannesburg Council vote for the new mayor, you remember Mr. Mashaba resigned, and then they had to get a new mayor, I think it was on the 28th of November when that council meeting took place. And there were 3 candidates, a DA candidate, an ANC candidate, and an EFF candidate. EFF candidate got the 30 votes of the EFF. The ANC candidate won because he had gotten the votes of some DA and IFP and whatever members together with the ANC. Had the DA members towed the line and voted for their candidate, the EFF would have gone with the DA candidate for the second round, and the opposition would have kept that council. What cost the DA that council was its own ill discipline. It was not the EFF. That's why they've now thrown out 3 councillors so far. They're trying to figure out who voted against, which of course is exactly what the ANC wants, because that means that there is disunity within the DA ranks. Now, the thing that hangs over the EFF like a sword of Damocles is the VBS scandal and its impact. The VBS is the Vendor Building Society. It is a bank which used to lend to the absolutely poor rural people of the former Venda homeland and the rest of what's north of Polokwane, north of Petersburg. And this includes people on a farm we still own at this stage. And our labourers on the farm all banked with VBS, and we know that VBS was looted, and that some of the money, about 16 million rand of it, went to the EFF, thanks to some good investigative journalism by Paulie van Wyk and the rest at the Maverick, at the Scorpio unit they have. This VBS scandal might still come back to haunt the EFF top leadership. The moment the National Prosecuting Authority actually prosecutes. Because Mr. Floyd Shivambu and Mr. Malema both clearly gained from that. This will not go unpunished by the voters. And it will prove an important test to the rest of the leadership of the EFF. Do they stand by their people once it is absolutely clear that they looted, or do they not? And if you want to predict that, you can. But I would stand back and wait just a little bit, because we do not have a precedent for it. Let's see what happens, but it's the thing that you couldn't mention at the EFF conference. Everybody looked at you askew when you simply tried. And secondly, the EFF in their policy documents, when referring to the VBS scandal, was so fascinating. They were saying, if it is true, they say, that the EFF got 16 million and that Floyd Shivambu was the conduit for it, why is he getting 96% of the media attention? Now that to me is neither here nor there. If that is an admission that he took 16 million rand, they've got a problem, and they're going to have a problem, because they're going to be attacked mercilessly, and there's absolutely no way that they can talk themselves out of looting the poor in the way that it happened. Now, media coverage of the EFF. During that conference of the EFF, there was a lot of hoo-ha about some media not being allowed and some being chased away and some leaving. Let's say this, 625 members of the media asked for accreditation to that conference. They only had place for 150. They never ever thought. I mean, they only had the place which they had, and they sent out a message about 3 weeks before that they would have to sort of cull, not literally, members of the media to not attend. So they gave accreditation to 150. They did not give accreditation to the Daily Maverick specifically, and they did not give accreditation to some journalists with whom they are in a court battle. And that led to quite an outcry, and that led to ENCA leaving, very fearfully leaving. They were sitting next to me and saying, "We're going to be attacked." And I said, "You're not going to be attacked." They said, "But we don't want to walk out." I said, "I'll walk out with you." So we walked out and they weren't attacked. It wasn't that bad, really. I mean, if that's the most exciting thing that's going to happen to you in your journalistic career, then you started too late. I mean, quite frankly, the stuff I've had to go through, drive people shooting at you from 5 directions in Bushbuck Ridge during a border dispute. You're not scared at the EFF Congress. Anyway, so media coverage of the EFF is problematic because at this stage we had SANEF, the South African National Editors Forum, actually taking the EFF to court and then losing to the EFF because they took them to court on something which they shouldn't have. The problem is at this stage that the media coverage of the EFF is so hostile that it's tough to trust. How do you write in an objective or balanced way about someone you're in a court case with? I'm not saying that you can't take any political party to court, but as far as I am concerned, for the duration of that court case, you should not report, no matter who the party or the person is. So they are very aggrieved at their media coverage, but I've always found them to be just like any political party. You just take them with a whole heap of salt. And they are what they are. Politicians are politicians. It's just the packaging that differs. Now, opposition cooperation from the EFF side is interesting. They're way more open to it than the DA. Perhaps because they have more to gain. I mean, their supporters are so loyal that they don't really change tack. But the EFF was open to opposition cooperation in Johannesburg, as I've explained, and we will see how that plans out. What I will say as well is that from my point of view, were the EFF ever to gain the majority in government, EFF is great at criticizing the ANC. They are splendid at that. But man, oh man, their own alternatives might be the only thing worse. So yeah, don't take what I've said as any sort of support for the EFF. It's just that I think that people tend to decide they're crazy or stupid and then do not take care to look at what they actually stand for and what the opportunities are. Quickly, Inkatha and the Freedom Front Plus. Yes, the IFP gained 3 seats and they are now the official opposition in KwaZulu-Natal. This was quite unexpected. And also their leader, Dr. Buthelezi, retired last year at the young age of 91. He will turn 92 on the 27th of August. He is still the parliamentary leader though. I went to a press conference of theirs in Milnerton yesterday, and he's very much still in charge. They might have the same position as the DA, a leader and a ruler. And in this case, the ruler is as agile as the DA's one. So we'll see what happens. What we did see happen is that the IFP moved in with the ANC and are now co-governing with them in Johannesburg. The history of the IFP will show that it does at its best, it's got its most support when it opposes the ANC the strongest. Any political party, opposition party in South Africa that works with the ANC drops in its support. This will happen to the IFP if they do that. As for the Freedom Front Plus, they've got a very simple position at this stage. They use social media, the rather dark alleys of the right-wing social media in South Africa, which do exist and are very noisy. And for the rest, they play the waiting game. I mean, the Freedom Front's not doing much. Leader of the Freedom Front told me the other day, no, Helen Zille is doing what needs to be done. They're just waiting for the DA to shed more support. And that is where they are. They don't have much money and they don't have much feet on the ground. So basically they take one by-election at a time and they do well. They did lose against the DA in Tabazimbi, which is another northern town, but it's a bit wealthier than the ones at which the Freedom Front won. So where there are people struggling in the north of the country and they are working class and white, they tend to go with the Freedom Front. So this leaves us with, I'm almost done, with the current political issues. Firstly, Eskom and the state-owned enterprises. That one's going to be a tough one to solve. Eskom and the state-owned enterprises are a complete mess. And basically people have to be fired and people have to be appointed from outside of the political grouping that favors the current government and its leading members. It is high time that people understand that these state-owned enterprises are there to deliver a service. They are not there as an employment agency. That might sound very obvious, but that would be revolutionary to the current government to actually understand that. The point of Eskom is to generate electricity. Exactly. Is that point at all acknowledged in any argument around Mr. Pravin Gordhan? No. So maybe under the current leadership of Mr. Ramaphosa, he clearly gets that. So does the Minister of Finance, Mr. Mboweni. So does a few of their supporters, Mr. Mantashe. But there are so many people who just don't. And until that penny drops, I think it's going to be tough for us. Expropriation without compensation, I have spoken about. I believe that at this stage, all things being equal and still not having seen the ANC's proposal because it does not exist, I think chances are that we might not have a change in the Constitution for the reasons I have explained. However, as I said, the capitalist opposition, I think, would do well to look out for a very moderate change from the ANC and then support it in order to ensure that that issue does not resurface for the foreseeable future. That, I think, would be a smart move, although there's absolutely no reason to believe that the capitalist opposition would make a smart move. But if they were to. The national health insurance, that's going to be a big fight, which I think the government will lose in the end. The rationality argument should trump anything. But yet again, if you were the capitalist opposition, whose supporters have most to lose through NHI, I would keep my eyes open and see what the EFF does, do a pincer movement on the government, and win that battle. I think that battle can be won. That's my thank you, and now I will take questions. Yes. Is the ANC going to swallow Mrs. De Lille? Only if it wants severe heartburn. I think they have swallowed her to an extent. Her party is not doing well. It's doing poorly in by-elections. There's been a few in predominantly coloured areas where the DA actually held its own largely. There was one in Kuilsriver, there was one in Bonteheuwel, and what I know is that the Good Party, as it is called, at this stage holds 2 seats in the National Assembly. It's Mrs. De Lille and Mr. Shaun August, and 1 seat in the legislature, which is Mr. Brett Herron. And those are her 2 best friends. She's looked after them well. They've got their income. There is no reason to believe that they are going to make a huge impact, but whatever impact they make, they will make at the cost of the DA. And I think the ANC knows that Good will do more damage to the DA on its own than it will were it to merge with the ANC, because many of those coloured voters would not vote ANC under any circumstances. So I think it is in the interest of the ANC not to swallow Mrs. De Lille for every reason under the sun. Right, next. Okay, the question is, did people leave the DA because of Helen Zille, because of Mmusi Maimane, and with Mmusi gone, Helen back, does it mean those people will return? Tough one. I think I would have thought that would have been the case. It didn't show in the by-election figures at all, although often with these rural by-elections, local issues are very important. But I think the DA was shocked at the Schweizer-Reyneke result this week, where Helen went to campaign, Steenhuisen went to campaign. It didn't help at all. Schweizer-Reyneke, of course, is the place in the country where the DA has the lowest support amongst the white electorate, or had in 2019. The thing is here that you need to ask yourself, A, will the people come back who left? B, where do you grow to? These are 2 issues. And we'll have to see, but I think that it will be tough for the DA at this stage to get those voters back, especially so in the deep rural areas. And the question is, where do they grow to? Which voters do they want to add? Both need to happen for the DA to recover. I think it's going to be very, very difficult. The best thing to do would be to ask those people not why they left, which I think there are clear reasons for. The Schweizer-Reyneke picture that was taken in the class of the teacher, do you know that story? Massive thing for Afrikaans voters. They felt she was targeted. They turned out to be right. Secondly, Mrs. De Lille. The way in which she was treated was seen as targeting Afrikaans people. Thirdly, there was a fight which may have passed you by, is Afrikaans fights are very, very intense and very, very internal. So many other people don't see them. There was a fight which concerned rugby. Now, you don't touch Afrikaans people on their rugby, okay? But there was a fight where Ashwin Willemse, who is one of the current presenters, well, no more, but was a presenter of a rugby program, walked off the set saying that he found Nick Mallett's handling of him to be racist. And the DA immediately backed Ashwin Willemse. And then in the end, it turned out that Advocate Vincent Maleka, who did the investigation, found that that was not the case. I think that's a big finding to make. But anyway, that hurt the DA, the fact that people took sides before the position was clear. Then there was the Hoërskool Oeverval issue, which was a school in Vereniging in an area where the DA previously had about 95% support, which was targeted by the EFF because it was an Afrikaans school which the EFF wanted to admit children who were not Afrikaans. And the spokesperson of the DA in Gauteng for Education, Mr. Kumi Ramalifo, agreed with the EFF, and then once it was shown that the EFF was actually acting against educational policy, the DA became very, how shall I put it, very nowhere in their response. They were sort of saying cool heads must prevail. Well, cool heads were not going to prevail in the Vaal Triangle, they never do. So people felt that the DA didn't stick up for its voters. And then the DA had to write, or they felt they had to write the Gauteng executive, the provincial government, and the DA spokesperson, Mr. Ramalifo, had to write a guy called Panyaza Lessufi, who is the MEC for Education in Gauteng, often regarded as a very good MEC, but not by Afrikaans people. And he rated him 7.5 out of 10, and the Afrikaans community exploded. So those were the reasons why they left the DA. My question, if you wanted to get them back, would be why did they vote for the DA in the first place, not why did they leave? That question has not been asked. I think that is the question that needs to be asked, if you want to get them back. Right, yes, whoa, yo.
85 minutes about South African politics, and you have once mentioned the word communist. Now, the communist, fascist influence in South Africa, to my mind, is very, very critical. And what have you got to say? I mean, the chances of the communists taking over in South Africa are possibly reasonably high. But I mean, I'm just an outsider. You're a politician.
I'm not a politician.
So how can you talk for 85 minutes without once mentioning the word communist?
Okay, so the question is, how can I speak for 85 minutes and not mention the word communist or fascist? Well, sir, because I believe the communist and fascist influence in our country to be very small. The thing is, fascism, let's deal with the communists first, because at least they exist. So the communist grouping in our country is very small, and to my mind, is actually quite a good influence on government, in the sense that where the communist and the liberal point of view overlap is on non-racialism and on being against corruption, right? So you will find that the least corrupt members of cabinet are the communists. They might have many other mistakes, and I'm not in favor of communism for 1 second. But within the context of state capture, the Communist Party has actually been firmly opposed, sometimes to its detriment. Its leader, well, its General Secretary, who is actually its leader, Dr. Bladen Simandi, was fired from cabinet by Mr. Zuma for his stance against it, and so has Mr. Jeremy Cronin. So within government, in the context of state capture, I think the Communist Party actually plays a good role. Also, they are quite small. Every time the Communist Party conference comes along, the Western Cape Communist Party, which is pitifully small, calls for it to contest elections by itself. I attended my first Communist Party conference in 2001, and it was a topic then. We are now 18 years later, 19 years later, and it has not been resolved one bit. The reason why the Communist Party will not contest on its own is because it is too small. It knows that by its reckoning, it can have a better influence on government policy by being inside than being outside. This is a view contested within the Communist Party, where people say that Bladen Samandi and the likes, Tulas Ngesi, who is in cabinet, are sellouts, that they basically sell out to the ANC the moment they get into cabinet. That might well be true, and within some parts of the Communist Party that's seen as a bad thing. You might see it as a very good thing. The point is that the Communist Party, I think, is not much of a threat in South Africa. Now, socialism, on the other hand, in the way that it is seen by the EFF, that is a growing phenomenon. But that's different from what the Communist Party wants. And the EFF prides itself on having created its own socialism. You can go read about it in their policy document. I find it very odd. But they are also often called fascist, the EFF. And I think when you refer to fascism, you refer to the EFF maybe. In his opening speech, which I will get your email address from you and I will send it to you, in his opening address to the National Assembly, Mr. Malema dealt with this at some length, because the EFF contest that they are not fascist. Now, of course, you will know the saying that the revolution will never be televised, which means it will come unannounced. So maybe them saying they're not fascist is the best reason to believe that they are. But the moment you start sort of arguing like that, then basically you're never open to persuasion. The thing is, he says, what is fascism? According to Mr. Malema's reading of fascism, it is somewhere where you have a single leader, a Führer type, or in the case of Mussolini, Il Duce, or whatever you want to call it, or in the case of Japan before the Second World War, the emperor, a leader from whom comes all direction. They claim they are not that. Secondly, he claims that they are non-racial. It does have white members. Yeah, they even had a white candidate in Krugersdorp the other day. Thirdly, they are saying they are in favor of multi-party democracy, etc., etc. He lists a range of things. So he answered that to a large extent. I don't know whether I'm convinced. I was convinced when he spoke, and then I saw them voting, and I've explained their voting system to you. I found that to be quite fascist. It seems that way. I would be careful to throw words at people which they are not. You know, people say Helen Zille is a racist. Oh, lots of people say it. Is she? I don't think so. But I'm not her. So I would be careful to judge someone a fascist if they themselves say they are not. But there are certainly elements of fascism, at least in the voting sessions of the EFF. I'll grant you that much. But yeah, so that would be my answer on communism and fascism. I don't think communism is so much of a problem. Fascism, yes. Okay, I'll allow you one more question, then I'll take another.
Just made the statement half an hour ago that the EFF want the government to take over the productive elements, but not homes. Well, homes don't, they're not in the productive. So that's a communist plot. So between fascism, it's all negative to liberal democracy, which is basically what we want here, which is what our constitution is about. So I'm saying that I think, in my opinion, that Malema's a very dangerous bloke.
Okay, so the gentleman's point is that if you look at EFF policy, for instance, on the nationalization of land, then Mr. Malema is very dangerous. Agreed. Absolutely agreed. I would not, however, call him fascist because name calling will not get us far. Right, next question. Yes. Yeah, you.
There's been talk about the two ANCs. What's your view on that?
That there are two ANCs. Yes, clearly, the ANC is as divided as it has ever been. We will see that, and that's why the first point I made was the National General Council. There we will see who is stronger. The Ramaphosa grouping believe that they...
Sorry, what are your predictions on that NGC?
Whew. He wants me to predict the NGC. So, I might be a clown, but I'm not a fool. No, look, that's impossible to predict. It would depend on who the delegates are. 90% of the delegates, I'm not dodging your question, I'm explaining why I can't answer it. And I'll get to yours. Where are you? I'll get to yours now. Okay, I'll deal with yours first. The two ANCs, and then I'll deal with the numerical aspect of it, or try to. Right. The two ANCs are basically those that support and take part in state capture versus those who do not. Those who do not scored a sort of victory in 2017, but to my mind it's just a Faustian victory, where Mr. Ramaphosa, in order to gain a majority, made a deal with Mr. David Mabuza, the current deputy president, to get a majority of the votes at the ANC National Congress or National Conference in Nasrec 2017. That is what gave him his majority of 179 out of 4,500 votes cast. To my mind, the plan B of the Ramaphosa grouping would have been better for the country. If they had lost, they would have walked out of the ANC. That was their decision. And at the time, I thought that would be the best for the country, because it would have meant that the ANC would have lost the 2019 general election to a post-ideological anti-corruption opposition coalition. That's what I would have liked. That would have been nice. But it didn't happen. So the ANC currently is fighting with itself, and there are these two groupings, obviously. So that is your point, and that is made. Now to his point, which is more difficult and actually impossible, because what you will see at the National General Council will be 2,500 to 3,000 delegates from branches, 90% of them from branches. And the problem with that is that the branches are likely, remember that the ANC structure is a branch per ward, to be councillors or their nominees. Now, if you see the point that the biggest corruption and state capture problem is at a local level, outside of Western Cape, then I'm saying Mr. Ramaphosa, if he takes a strong line with the anti-state capturers, will place himself in a very difficult position, because those people, if he were to actually implement his decisions against corruption, might end up in jail. Now, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So what I think might happen at the NGC, and this is not a prediction, I was called a predictor by the lady who introduced me. I'm not at all. I do not predict. I try to extrapolate from current situations what might happen, but I don't predict, because I would not presume to predict. But if I were to predict, I would do the following, which I'm not doing. What was that about a politician? Anyway, so I would say this. What we know is that within the Zulu-speaking constituency of the ANC, which will find itself on the high of Mpumalanga, certain parts of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, aided and abetted by the Free State ANC, which is Magashule country, There is an effort to put a motion of no confidence in Mr. Ramaphosa and his handling of ANC policy. This means if that will only be put if those people believe they have the numbers to succeed. They don't want to put it and lose. But if their numbers show that they have the majority, then they will put a motion of no confidence, knowing full well that the National General Council cannot change the leadership of the ANC. A leader of the ANC cannot be unseated at the National General Council. This is what the Ramaphosa grouping tells us every time this issue is raised. We know that. But there are leadership and leadership positions. If Mr. Ramaphosa were to lose a motion of no confidence, or if decisions are taken to implement policy which he is dead against, he will be the leader, but only in name. He will become what Mr. Maimane was towards the end of his tenure, where everybody knew that he had no longer control of the party, and where to some degree Mr. Steenhuisen is currently, where everybody knows that much as he is the leader, the power does not vest with him, for better or for worse. So if Mr. Ramaphosa were to lose either a motion of no confidence or a vote on how the ANC decisions are to be implemented, he would still be the leader, but he would no longer be the ruler. That is what I expect. Yes.
How would that impact on voting in the next local government?
I should think poorly for the ANC. Because it would mean that the corrupt will win and our voters will not stand for that. But what it will mean for the country is not so good, because it's still far to go to the next national election, and before that the ANC has its next conference, and that means that it will put the people who are against Mr. Ramaphosa in a very strong position. So yes, for local government elections, very bad for the ANC, for the rest, very bad for the country. Yes, sir.
There was a sort of a narrative that President Ramaphosa was playing for time and that the National Prosecuting Institution would take care of people like expert issues. But it seems to be moving very slowly. What are your views on that?
Okay, so the question is, when are we going to see prosecutions of these state capturers? Look, if I knew, then they couldn't take place, because the National Prosecuting Authority must act independently and without fear or favour. So if they inform me, they should all resign. So, but what we are told anecdotally is that this is right on the verge of happening, but we've been told this since about July, and that Mr. Magashule is first in line to meet with the nice people of the NPA. All the NPA has to do is to get my good friend Peter Louis Meiburg to read them his book called State of Capture, which is an excellent book, and then they have enough, to my mind, to have a prima facie case. However, it has not happened. I know that there is frustration in the presidency at the fact that, I'm not saying specifically Mr. Magashule, but that state capturers are not being prosecuted. However, the presidency can do exactly zilch about it. It's up to Mrs. Batoy and the National Prosecuting Authority. They have not been fast at all. In fact, they say between the snail, grass growing, paint drying, and Mrs. Batoy, the slowest seems to be Mrs. Batoy. All that I can say to that is that I can only hope that they're building their case, because there's a French saying that says, if you shoot at the emperor, you must not miss. We'll have to see. I can't give you an exact answer, but that is the score. Yes?
Thanks, Daniel, for a very clear summary of where things are. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is the flaw in governance not in the Constitution, in that the voting is for constituency through the country, so that in fact, the people in power are actually creating a state of who they want, and therefore you can never change that.
Yes, so the question is the problem not with our voting system, which is completely proportional and according to a list system, which can be seen as a slate, where you just vote and you don't really know who you get. I mean, our area of Sea Point has had so many MPs. I mean, I don't know, well, I do know who the current one is, but I don't know how long he's going to be there. And I didn't specifically vote for him. I would have, but I didn't, okay? I wasn't given the choice. The point is, that was the decision that was taken in '94. Then there was a commission appointed, headed by Dr. van Zyl-Slabbert, and they said that we had to have a mixed system like Germany has, where half of your people are PR proportional and half of your people are constituency, like we have in the city councils, which I also think is a much, much better system. But for some reason, our government does not support it. So at the moment, it can't be changed because it doesn't have majority support. I fully agree with you, and so did Dr. Slabbert, and that's always very, very good person to agree with, Dr. Slabbert. Lovely fellow, and yeah, that's what they wanted. Yes?
May I ask you another question?
Yes, sure.
A lot of the people who voted for the Ramaphosa effect have been disappointed. They were mostly DA supporters.
Yes.
Surely that's going to make a big difference in the next election if they don't vote for Ramaphosa again.
Indeed. So the question is, has the Ramaphosa factor fallen away? That having been mostly DA voters who voted for Mr. Ramaphosa because they wanted the ANC to not go below 50% and perhaps team up with the EFF. No, what they never thought of was whether the EFF wants to team up with the ANC, which they don't. That was actually a ridiculous situation. I don't know why people bought that argument. But your point is, will the fact that so many of those people are disappointed with Mr. Ramaphosa mean that they go back to the DA, for instance? We'll have to wait and see. I think what will help the DA in the next election is that it's a local government election. The DA tends to do well in local government elections because they tend to have very good councillors. And I think there are two things to watch there. The first is that the DA itself might believe, that people might think the DA does better than it should. And the second is that the DA might believe it themselves. I think you're going to find people voting differently in local government and in national elections. So for the next national election, it's an open question whether Mr. Ramaphosa will be there at all, given what I've just said on the intra-ANC situations. So I think for the next national election, the Ramaphosa factor will fall away. Yes?
You set out why the government is dysfunctional, because you have this riven ANC between the state capital and the ones who are the rational ones, under Ramaphosa and Pravin Gordhan and the current head and the finance minister. Do you have any view that maybe they realize that they can't address these fundamental problems at the state-owned enterprises and therefore get any reduction in the unemployment rate, and therefore they don't want to lose support by taking radical measures like slimming down Eskom to what it should be in employment, that they realize that once South Africa can't maybe support its international debt in servicing terms, which won't be for the next year or two, that they feel the IMF might make these harsh decisions for them, and therefore they will not be seen as the ones having to do it?
Sure. That's a long question with a few parts. So basically what you're saying is the ANC government dodging difficult decisions in order for the IMF to take them on their behalf? Is that about right?
Is there a realization that the only way out for the end result will be that?
Well, I think that is precisely what is being discussed at the NEC of the ANC at the moment. And as we've said, as the gentleman put it, there are two ANCs. And we'll have to see. I think nobody wants to go the IMF route. But the sort of more Ramaphosa grouping, which you call the more realistic grouping, they know that that is the route that we're headed for if there's no change. The question is whether they are prepared to take the tough decisions, and whether they will be supported by the rest of the ANC, were they to do so. I think they want to take those decisions. I think Mr. Mboweni is clear, Mr. Gordhan is clear, and those who are close to Mr. Ramaphosa are clear. They now have to do it. If I were them, this is what I would do. I would sit down with the opposition parties, and mostly the EFF, and ask them, what do you propose we do within the current situation now? I think that given the level of economic thought within the EFF, and given the history that I've given on, for instance, what happened in the electoral centre when everybody in the end banded together. From my discussions with top EFF people, I think they might be pliable. But they need to be consulted. I think that things have reached a stage where all inputs need to be taken. If the EFF prove to be unbendable, then you are where you are. You haven't lost much. You've just taken their view. But if you find them to in some way be amenable, that would suddenly create a lot of space for movement. So that would be the first thing I would do, at least find out what they think. Secondly, the harsh decisions will have to be taken, or they will be taken for us. That is your point. And that will mean giving up sovereignty in the economic space. No one wants that. But that might be where we're headed if we're not careful. And I think there is some realization of that, even though there's not much talk of it at the moment. Where are we time-wise? 10 minutes still. Okay, good. Wait. First you.
I have to just go on to a different tack.
Yes.
Is that I first want to say that I'm an expat, but we spend a lot of time here, and my children live here. So I think I can kind of speak with some authority.
Yes.
When we were here and Mr. Ramaphosa became the new guy on the block, our friends and people we spoke to were absolutely enthralled with the man. He was going to do everything right. Things were going to change slowly, but they were. And my question to you is, why were they not saying to themselves, Mr. Ramaphosa sat next to Jacob Zuma for all those years and never once opened his mouth. So now that he was in charge, he was going to open and do these things. I felt at the time that, I understood that things were so bad during the Zuma time that anybody would have been better. But it really worried me. And the same I'm seeing in the States. I know it because our vice president stands there, says nothing. So that's my question.
If you think Trump's bad, how bad is Pence? Okay, so.
My question is, too much, I feel like so much was expected. And maybe that's why we're in this position and our expectations have not been met.
Okay, do you want to add to that?
No, I just wanted to add to the previous one.
Okay, then I'm going to take you after I've taken this. Okay, I'll get back to you. Right, so, yes.
Deputy presidents don't hold much power.
Come again?
Deputy presidents don't hold much power.
They're a heartbeat away from the presidency, sir. No, it is important who they are and what they do and what they agree to, surely. Okay, so wait. I'm first going to answer this question now. No more interventions, then we'll take other questions. So as far as Mr. Ramaphosa goes then, why has he been a disappointment? And has he been a disappointment? That's the question. What has he done right? We haven't really looked at that. Let's put it this way. My understanding is that he told Moody's, the only rating agency that hasn't put us in trash hasn't trashed us. He said, they told him, what we want you to do is to build the institutions, rebuild the institutions. Now, if you look at what he has done at SARS, at the Revenue Service, where he brought in a very capable man called Mr. Kieswetter, what he has done at the NPA, which was completely dysfunctional and which Mrs. Patoy must now rebuild. What he has done or tried to do even at Eskom, although that hasn't worked, but what he is trying to do is to rebuild those institutions. That is the reason why we have not been put into, basically have been trashed by all the, which would, if all these rating agencies put us in that grouping, then we couldn't have investment. It's physically impossible. So there he has done well. Also, what is true is that he has brought in billions of rands of investment into South Africa through his own personal efforts, etc., etc. But the moment he agreed to have David Mabuza as his deputy president, I think he made a Faustian pact with himself in the role of Faust and Mabuza in the role of the other. So I think I agree with you that in that sense he wasn't strong enough. In the end, we hold our futures in our hands. He has done what he has done, nothing can change that. It's important what he does from here. And this is why this weekend is important. The decisions taken by the NEC of the ANC and at the Cabinet Lekgotla next week will decide which direction we go in. There's very little room for maneuver now. There's choices to be made. If they choose to go the route of the populist choice, then I think we have serious problems. If they take the more difficult choice, then I think things might improve. But he has to show leadership. Now, my friend Ralph Mateka said right at the beginning when Mr. Ramaphosa took over, neither Ralph nor I bought this whole Ramaphoria thing, which you referred to. And Ralph said the problem with Mr. Ramaphosa is that he is a diplomat, not a leader. A diplomat must convey decisions, a leader must take decisions. He's very good at conveying decisions, but not so good at taking them. He has to step up to the plate, and he has to do so now. Yes, sir.
You were talking about the ANC must consult with the EFF. Why can't they consult with the DA?
No, they can do that as well, but their problem... Okay, why is the EFF more important for the ANC to consult with than the DA? Because on these matters of finance, the ANC is more likely to lose votes to the EFF than to the DA. That means that if you are the ANC, you want to win the next election. On these matters, the DA and the EFF, the DA and the ANC are quite close together. Mr. Ramaphosa and the DA are not far apart in what they want to do. That's why so many of the DA voters changed to him. The fear would be what the other people in the ANC do, and they are closer to the EFF. If you can agree with the EFF on the path taken, it means that the opponents of Mr. Ramaphosa and the ANC run out of space. That's the only reason why I say so. I do not think one is more important than the other. I think on land, for instance, that the DA and the ANC can stand together, and on NHI that the DA and the EFF can stand together. What I'm saying is people must listen to what the other side says. Do the EFF hate white people? Best to ask the EFF. They say they don't. Yeah, they wouldn't. It's like a Christine Keeler answer, you know. Christine Keeler saying, well, he would, wouldn't he? Well, he would say that he doesn't hate white people. I don't know. I mean, I haven't found that, personally. But then my friend Flip Buys, the head of Solidarity, tells me you must remember every Nazi had his favorite Jew.